Okay, hello, and welcome to episode 41 of the Following Mechanical Turks project. So today we're going to take a look at some IRB stuff related to our second product, where we'll be posting hits and using the results we get. We both want the material from the Turkers that we post, but we're also tinkering with the language of the hit itself to see the differences there, because we're sort of broadly interrogating questions of comprehension. So readability, legibility, accuracy, these sort of terms that popped up in the first product. We're examining those in sort of a different way in this second product. So that's the gist of what we'll talk about. We'll then also, if we have an opportunity, chat about the revisions to the first product. So that's what we talked about last time primarily. Went ahead and posted a revised outline on the, or at least on a Google Doc. And now we've, started to flesh out that outline. So that's proceeding apace. I responded to all the comments that were posted on the site. You, of course, can do that as well if, there's something you'd like to contribute to those. But I responded to all the, unless I missed one or two, I don't know. I think I got them all. The comments posted on the draft itself. Mostly those are sort of acknowledgement of, that's a good comment, and here's how we might address that. I mean, some of them go into more detail, which potentially we could look at, but mostly that's what they kind of consisted of.
Yeah.
Scale that down. Let's see here. So I was just taking a quick look at some of those. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah. Okay. Anywho, sorry. So we can chat about IRB.
Yeah.
So you've posted the media that we need, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Surprisingly, or maybe surprisingly, the writing up the paragraph to be summarized was interesting, because I had to avoid, and I probably still need to tweak it, writing it as if I was doing the hit for the video. Like, I found myself sort of going into that language of, so I think I think if I want to revise it and make it more, I don't know, more of a short story, as opposed, it's almost too descriptive.
Right.
That's at least my first instinct to what is there is it's already in the language or in the style of a description. And so I think
it makes the task just kind of condensing what's there, or like, picking, or, maybe cutting off the first sentence, right, and saying, well, that's what it's about, right?
I mean, when I read that, I'm like, that's actually what you could just put, and that would be a decent one. Yeah. So
yeah, I was looking through this, and then maybe, of course, some editorial.
Sure.
The father stand just behind him, putting his right on the chair his son is sitting in. There are a few of those in there.
I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. That right. I mean, it's tricky because it's already kind of providing what we're asking for. So the question would be, how do you change this? Do you do it kind of, it's tricky. How do you do this? I guess you maybe have to sort of like do description where it's like, instead of saying, like, here's what's going on, like, a boy sits at a desk, a older man stands slightly behind it, so that, like, you couldn't just pluck out a sentence, you know?
But too, it's interesting the way you describe that is should I have identified the roles?
Right.
So that was even something that I thought in the, yeah, I kept, when Jody, my wife, who did the footage, she goes, "You want to move Garth Brooks?" And I said, "I maybe want to keep him there to see what people do with that."
Yeah. I don't think that would invite any kind of IP issues. I mean, you can have pictures of people.
Yeah, yeah. The practice now of some law enforcement officers to play music when they're being recorded so that the videos get taken down off of sites.
Right, for copyright violations. I don't think this is that. I know this came up because isn't exactly the same thing, but like if you take photos, we took a photo of a part of on our campus that had students on it. You know, there were students just walking around, so they were in the photo, and that photo was used as the cover of a publication the university issued. And I said, you know, I was like, well, do you have to get like permission from those students? And they, you know, and the textbook or the publisher, who was a textbook publisher, who obviously had dealt with this many times, said, nope. He said, it's a public place. We can actually take a photo of people, and if they're in a public space, we can use it for this without any kind of sign off from them, which was interesting. But I mean, I guess, you know, they clearly knew this. They're like, now we've done this a million times.
Luckily, I'm clearly close personal friends with Garth Brooks, so if there's any issue, I just make a call.
Right.
One of my former grad students is his nephew, so I am in fact, plugged into the Brooks family.
Well, I am. We share a home state.
Mm-hmm.
That's why
we're covered. Between those two connections, legally, this is airtight.
Right.
Your Honor, I'm from Oklahoma. Oh, case dismissed.
It is odd because he is looking directly at camera.
Yes.
He's in the know about what's happening, whereas the other two seem unaware. It's the cinema verite for them.
Yeah, that's a terrifying feature of my house, is a Garth Brooks cutout.
That's an interesting question. Yeah, we might tinker with this. I mean, speaking of this sort of, I mean, it's a segue into the hit itself. Because as I mentioned, I met with Amy Evans again, who we previously had as, she might have been one of, if not our first guest. She was certainly, I think maybe Kathleen was our first.
Yeah, she's been with us since the beginning.
Yeah. But anywho, let's just sort of speak to what the hit's going to be. We might tinker with that textual one, which is the most unusual one, because the other three are sort of built around the same thing, right? I mean, the video is the video, the audio is the video with the audio stripped out, and the image is a still from it. The text requires a more synthetic, it requires the kind of thing we're asking the Turkers to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess one question that this raises is, do we not have the textual variant?
Yeah, I don't.
It's an interesting question.
Yeah. I think maybe I think what I should do is, I was also trying to, I think one of them, not mistakes I made, is because we're seeing all the media, like one's a version of the other one. And so I tried to do that with the text. And so it ended up being a description. I wonder if I try to be less, there's no reason that narrative has to somehow be true to the video.
Yeah.
So I think if I just write it as, if I'm not trying to describe what I'm seeing and just write a paragraph of somebody helping somebody with something, it'll work better because I'm not trying to describe the video. I'm just creating a scene that echoes the video, but actually isn't, a word for word, or it's not pulling dialogue from it. Actually, I approached it too much like the hit we were going to give people, and not the production of text that someone would then have to summarize. That's why the first sentence is,
it's a topic sentence.
Yeah, and that could be what, I imagine if a lot of people watch that video, that's the sentence we'll get. So probably not the sentence I should have started with.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a question. It's an interesting question because, I mean, you know, worst comes to worst, we just don't use that data or whatever. But it is an interesting question. And we remarked upon this previously, that the textual one is the oddball here. And, you know, it kind of speaks to what we're getting at with the hit. Let me pull up the hit, in fact, because that was, let me just write this here. Right. Something that came up in our discussion, or with my discussion with Amy Evans, was, you know, I guess there's a larger question, of course, with what we're trying to see with the hit. What are we, you know, what question are we answering with the hit, right? Me. And, you know, definitely we're addressing issues of, is there a difference? I mean, one explicit question has to do is there a difference in those three terms that emerged in the first product, those being accurate, readable, and relevant, right? Is there a meaningful difference in how those terms are perceived by this platform or this system, or are those essentially synonyms, right? That function identically. Another thing potentially we're addressing here, with having two variants of the first round, right? The task description essentially is identical. The only difference is the title and description. I should say the task and instructions are identical and the task is identical, but there's a difference in the title and the description, and that difference can be summarized in one, we identify what you do, right? And in one, we identify how long it's going to take. That's kind of what predicates or grounds these two things. And one thing we're scratching out there is there a difference in the response you get, primarily like metadata response? So how quickly do the hits disappear if you frame it as here's how long it will take? Potentially, you know, the difference in terms of what the replies are, but also like the clarity of instructions. That's something that I'd actually like to talk to you about, because, and I talked about this with Amy Evans, you know, there's three questions here. The first is to write a one sentence descriptive summary, and that language is always identical because we're not testing the term summary. It didn't really emerge. We're testing the adjectives, right? You know, readable and accurate and so forth. But it asks to write a one sentence summary. And then it has these two questions: were the instructions for this survey clear? And then if not, what was unclear in the instructions? Is the reward for completing this survey adequate? And if not, why should the reward be greater? It doesn't ask why should it be different. I'm assuming it would be, no one would say, yes, I should have less, you know. And, you know, but I wrestled with that assumption.
Sure.
But anywho, you know, potentially there will be differences in that information based on if it's presented as here's how long it's going to take versus here's what you do. So, you know, there's a sense in which this first one, we are getting at this notion of, you know, legibility writ large, in the sense of how our instructions are legible to the Turker. Right? Yeah. In the second round, we're getting at this question in terms of, are these terms meaningfully different?
Yeah.
So, I mean, in a sense, it's like, it's important for us to kind of keep in mind, it's like, what research question do these things answer?
Yeah.
In part because it speaks to how we're framing that second product. Even things just like the research we incorporate and, sort of what we're doing with it. I bring this up in part because, we've both been sort of considering stuff. Let me stop sharing for a second. Like, what research, what theory, what framework, what interpretive framework is going to be relevant to this.
Right.
And, increasingly, I've been thinking about this as building off of that a larger discourse of readability that or legibility, this kind of plexus of terms that is in a lineage that we've talked about before, but it was long ago. It was at the beginning of the project, and it builds on some previous work I've done about understanding literacy, right? Some previous work I've done looking at, building off people like Ong and some other folks, Holmvik's electracy is in there, but this lineage of orality, and orality having sort of like a base unit of the word or the morpheme or the phoneme, I should say. They're sort of like, a unit of orality. Literacy arguably has the same kind of thing. And many thinkers have considered like, the implications of the shift from orality to literacy, and then potentially a shift from literacy to digitality, right? I mean, that's where electracy, that, Ulmer and other folks address. It comes from sort of viewing a historical shift from orality to literacy and electracy, or digitality, I should say, perhaps. I mean, that was part of it, is there's no real sort of coherent term about that. We tend to agree about like orality and literacy, but post-literacy, we're still, what's that?
You're right. Still trying to figure out what exactly yeah.
Because we're in it, and that discourse has kind of waxed and waned. Like some of the works I mentioned are older at this juncture, but some of the things I was looking at were sort of like, some of those have units, like the word, the phoneme, the written word. They have sort of like a basal unit to them. And that wasn't so clear when we get post-literate into digitality, where it's like, well, what's the base unit there? It's not like there's contestants for that. Like, well, maybe it's sort of like a multimedia unit. It's like, yeah, maybe it's the bit, right? Maybe it's sort of what's fundamental to a computer. It's like, yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
And so in part, what I was scratching toward was maybe the base unit is the perceived human, because in a post-literate, in a digital environment, we're no longer the primary decryptor of symbols. We are the symbols to be decrypted, right? I mean, that was the whole thrust of the work, was the base unit in a digital sphere is no longer, the phoneme or the grapheme. It's the visible human. What we do is interpreted by other nodes in the system, right?
Which does, right? That's another interesting way of getting at the kind of, going back to our earlier conversation, right? The sort of the so what question, right? And one, not quick, one at least readily compelling argument is the size of Amazon, and the fact that it's got this system. And now, right, isn't it that the person who stepped up, because Bezos is gone, is the guy who ran AWS, which is the wing in which Turks falls under, I think.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. It's like, is that person coming from the physical logistics that we very much associate with Amazon? I mean, generally we think Amazon, we think, they ship, whatever cheap stuff to you quickly, which is true. But yes, it would be interesting to see, if they see the future as web services,
Yeah. And what's interesting then is, for them, if you look at HIT, right, the human is their kind of base unit.
Mm-hmm.
That at that point, I like what you're saying, both because I think it makes sense, and it fits with, we had Casey on to talk about his common project, right? But also the notion that the human in the human intelligence task, right? a certain extent, we could say that Amazon, building on that, right? Its base unit is the hit, the human, right? There's the, you know,
that understood broadly.
Yeah.
Because even things like, their logistics expertise, which we, gesture towards in the revised first products introduction, a lot of that's largely predicated on, tracking behavior, right? I mean, as it stands, the revised first product starts with a brief vignette about Amazon tracking union organizers.
Right.
I mean, it starts with this vignette that we used because it speaks to these questions of labor, and because there's this almost perfect photo of a labor organized, person from a union holding up a sign that says, "We are not robots," right? I mean, it's basically the cover image of this, and it's about Amazon instituting a technological system that is tracking their workers to try and squelch incipient labor organization, right? It's almost just super rich vignette.
No, I mean, if you go back to that original image of the mechanical Turk, right, you would imagine that essentially the people not, the idea that the hoax wasn't, everybody knew it was not a robot, right? So this position from, you could imagine someone standing next to the mechanical Turk holding a sign saying, "This is not a robot."
Yeah.
And then bookended by a human being holding up a sign saying, "I'm not a robot," right? There's a weird symmetry in that, from this confusion of, right, which of course Professor Kang, who we talked to, right, would trace that, right, this oscillating back and forth between "that isn't a robot," "I'm not a robot," "I'm a machine," "I'm not a machine," right? This constant toggling back and forth between the human and the machine as a pivotal dividing line that we use to organize.
Well, and there's something in, oh, sorry.
No, I'm done.
There's something in that, and in Casey's work and in some of this other stuff that we'll take a quick look at, but in the discussion of our first product, it moves toward this notion of, it's a notion of visibility, of, we address it as telling in the discussion, right? This notion of making a certain thing trackable, right? Whatever that thing is, making a human aspect trackable, visible to a net. And, I was kind of writing about this because, addressing that "so what" question was the strangeness but import of, identity or economic, of there being, an economic impact or visibility to making visible an aspect, particularly an aspect of, like, I'm a cancer survivor, and making that, telling that, making that visible algorithmically has an economic import. It's like, your validity is based on your ability to expose certain things that make you human, right? Make you vulnerable in particular ways.
Yeah.
So this framework of, like, visibility, I mean, as I was thinking of it, it's like, yeah, I mean, the earlier work I was doing is something we could potentially use to frame the second one. Casey's work on citizenship, potentially. This also is related, that came up. This is the book, Seeing Like a State.
Yeah.
This is the thing I texted you about. And I got to this through a different piece that was about TikTok by, I think, Eugene Wei. And it was really kind of interesting because it's all about the legibility of the human in algorithms. And, a lot of it, and he talks about, human readability in algorithms. And so I was just like, wow. And he keeps referring to this book, which has gotten play in tech circles. And it says how certain schemes to improve the human condition have failed. And the whole thing is about the state and its function to make human beings legible, to make them data points that can be understood, right? And interestingly enough, like, it has a whole chapter on Metis. I mean, it talks about, it pulls in, I know, it's bonkers. I look at this and I'm like, holy shit. I mean,
add this to my cart.
Yeah, it dips into straight up rhetoric where it talks about, there's this classical concept and, like, Jesus. And so, I mean, like a lot of it talks about, it's like, taming nature and architecture of legibility, right? I mean, a lot of it is about this notion of making aspects of civilization visible in certain ways. And this came out, right? I think 98 was when it was first released. It's one of those things that's.
When what was released in 98?
This.
Oh,
yeah. I mean, this isn't like a high-tech book. It's just that the concepts, it's one of those things where it's like you find these older, we're talking 20 years here, concepts that have found this new resonance because it's like, it's this sort of perfect parable for algorithmic thinking.
yeah.
Where this is about, I mean, as it says, the failures, the complexities of making social aspects visible, intelligible.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I was already starting to build this theoretical framework predicated on this notion of things we've talked about, right? Readability, intelligibility, telling, right? The role of the human as one of telling. But what my thing was with this is there an imperfect fit with that framework and the actual hits we're posting, right? So one of the things that came out of our feedback on the first product was people said, I really like your discussion. I'm not sure how anchored it is in the previous results section. I'm like, yeah, I understand that critique. At the same time, it's like, we did write that section in response to, I mean, it did come from it. It's not like it pre-existed and we just bolted them together. It's like, no, that discussion really did come from the results. I mean, quite literally. Yeah. That's what happened. I do agree that it's like, you're right. The discussion gets more, it extrapolates, right? I understand the critique. My defense is that is literally what we did, was write it based on it. It is true that it gets a little further afield. I don't know if part of that is just like fixable, where maybe we collapse the discussion and conclusion, because the critique or the feedback was sort of like, this feels more like a conclusion where you're kind of abstracting from the results.
And as I mentioned, it's at several points. I mean, one of the reasons that I will cop to that critique is I think it's also a genre consideration. It's not, I think what they're picking up, it's not written like a discussion section, in part because I was struggling to make it sound like right. Extrapolation's my primary mode of scholarship. So in many ways, one of the reasons I take that criticism, as you and I discussed, I struggled with the genre of a discussion section in that kind of article. I've my own sort of practice is not, I want to quickly, right? I want to extrapolate right away. So,
and there may be tweaks we can make that do that. So for example, I mean, like, because the product follows IMRAD structure explicitly, but you'll notice, and this is always kind of a weird thing, that it's not IMRAD, right? I mean, it doesn't have a conclusion appended onto it.
Right.
Typically speaking, IMRAD structure ends with the discussion. There may be a way we can take our existing conclusion, which I think is more tied to the results directly. It's a very brief kind of cumulative statement. It's like sort of, so the results show this. I think we might actually be able to collapse those and and switch their position, essentially, where it's like the existing conclusion, which is a cumulative statement of the results, says, so here's what we've got for the results, and then segue into what is now the discussion, which is an extrapolation of those results. I think we might actually be able to fix it by putting them together and switching their position and connecting them, saying like, okay, so here's a cumulative statement and here's the import of this as a way of moving toward, and that's why we're going to be looking at these other things in the future, But I think that's relevant, but I think it also speaks to our need to be mindful in the second product about sort of getting the cart before the horse, in the sense of, for both of us, what's sort of most exciting seemingly is these kinds of broader kind of cultural theoretical issues where it's like, that's where we start going off, you know?
Yeah.
We need to be conscious of, it's like, yeah, but how does that tie to the hit where they're writing a summary, right?
Why not just write that article about the broad,
Right.
right. At some point, I was reviewing something, and the second half of it was really engaging. And my response was, this is great. I don't know what the first half was for. Like you don't need any of that to make any of the claims you're making in the second half. So, I don't think that's the case with ours, but I could see how it could get, if you jump too quickly to those broader things, then why not just do that?
Right.
Kind of piece. So I think you're all to say that you're right.
Yeah. So we just kind of need to be, I think, conscious of, why is the actual hit posting stuff in there in a way that is not incommensurable with, as you say, it's like you've got this and you've got this. It's like, yeah, but those aren't, just do this. That's what you're interested in.
Right.
Anywho, so it is something to keep in mind, is like, well, how is this grounding it? Or how is this evidence, right? Or how does it lead you to this, right? I mean, that's kind of the thing, is like, what labor is, posting and receiving answers to hits doing in that second product? Is it proof of something? Is it your method? What is it actually doing there? Anywho. Let me just write this down also. Collapse.
Yeah, the old compress it and flip it.
Thing down, flip it and reverse it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Anywho, yeah. So that was one thing that came up. I mean, in a sense, it was like, I was kind of excited because and I'm not completely wedded to it, but it's like, oh, if what we're building up is this notion of telling that we picked up in the first thing, and looking at these sort of terms swirling around summary and information, right? I mean, readability, accuracy, if that's the plexus we're looking at, I was like, oh, it taps into these previous notions of legibility and the human as a basal unit, right? That literacy in a digital world is not me being able to read text. Primarily, that doesn't go away, right? Just like we still talk, even though we are in a literate culture, but potentially primary literacy moves up or moves out in terms of scale from the individual human, I can read, to I can be read, right? By the plexus. So I was like, oh, there's kind of a good framework for this, but at the same time, it's like, I didn't want to force that, and therefore move away from, the actual work with the hit itself.
Yeah. But I still think that's, what was I going to say? I mean, right, there's still a sense in which, because the second project is focused on the Turker, I mean, there's a way in which what we're getting at is that base unit of the human in some way, and how they're, because essentially, well, not essentially, I'm going to say that, conceivably or possibly, I'm imagining how it, I was just thinking as I was doing the IRB training, right? And this whole tension between, you want to, respect the research subject's autonomy, but some studies involve not letting them know what you're trying to get necessarily, because that will, they'll try to give you what you want, right? That need for that, right? So I'm trying to imagine what a Turker thinks. Why does a Turker think that they're doing this hit? Like, what do they think our goal is with this hit? And the sense is, right, are they just going to read it as another, that we're up to, right, it occurred to my mind, training algorithms to create captioning for home videos, right? I don't know, right? But that notion of, I don't know, I lost the thread there, but right, that if you're saying, right, that the literacy is about the human being made readable, is that, are we getting at that with the second product, right? How do humans participate in the generation of making humans readable in some way?
Yeah, and right. I mean, it's like, should the hit be different where, but see, I don't know. It's like, if you look at like the first product, it's like, why repeat what we saw in the first product in the sense of, well, okay, the way to get at this is ask them about their cancer survival. It's like, but that's already been done, right? I mean, that's what the first product was.
Yeah.
In the second product, I mean, I think there's a way we can say it's because we're scratching at this, we're scratching at this notion of like literacy broadly understood, where, I mean, what we're asking for is like information summaries. Look at this thing and read it. This is readable memory, or excuse me, media.
Yeah.
This is readable. I need therapy after these. It's readable media, right? And you are in turn making it readable and making yourself intelligible through this act. I mean, through this hit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you are making yourself a sensor in ways for a plexus.
So what's interesting about that, right? So I guess if I'm reading you right, that one of the questions that you're asking is, given your recent thinking about this and how it fits in with your previous work, are our hits getting at that? And I think what you just said is there's no way our hit can't get at that. Because if what you're saying is true, that the base unit in this digitality is the human, there's no hit we could compose that doesn't activate that.
Right. Yeah, and then it speaks to the question of, so why this hit, if that's the case, why this one rather than another one, right? That's the question you have to answer. And I think potentially the answer is because this one is specifically, it builds on what we saw in the first one, the information about telling. Yeah. And it's specifically attuned to other forms of literacy, other forms of reading, right? Reading a situation, summarizing a text, things we identified as being kind of characteristically human, i.e. the kind of things that are still posted as hits, right? There is the sense in which, Amazon's Mechanical Turk as a platform is this interesting moving target where it's like, at some point you won't need those hits anymore because that will be doable to a degree by the machine learning algorithm that you were building, right? I mean, you were training your replacement by doing that. So we don't need you to do that hit anymore. We've got the data set.
We post a hit like this, and then a Turka responds by saying, why don't you just use that service that IBM has now?
Yeah.
Like, you don't need this anymore.
There is a sense in which some hits seem to be training your own replacement, right? I mean, it's
sense we get is that, that could very well be the bulk of the hits.
But at the same time, it's like, I wonder if there's ever a point. I don't know if that at some point, the last hit is posted and it's shut down because it's like, well, we've fully automated the human, right?
Right.
I suspect it's just a moving target. Whereas we saw with with Kang's work, it's like, well, then it changes what it means to be human. It's like, okay, well, now you do that, and that's what a human intelligence task is.
Yeah, the last hit will just be "Computer, do you love me?" and then it just sings Daisy as you unplug it. By the way, it's somewhat related. Somebody just shared a tweet with me. It's a camera that was on like a weather camera, I think, on like a cell tower that was engulfed in one of the recent wildfires in California,
Yeah.
and it glitched and it just kept sending the same picture over and over again of this horrible picture of this flame over this tower. And it just, the camera went, quit, the feed quit. So it didn't know what to do. So it just kept posting the last image. And it struck me as like the first thing I thought of was, Hal being unplugged in 2001: A Space Odyssey. It was this, it couldn't help but continue to share this, like that's its job, is to keep taking and sending this picture over and over again. I don't know it. And I got it right as we were getting ready to start this. And so I immediately thought of it in terms of, I don't know, you could over anthropomorphize it and say like, what an act of like, keep sending the signal no matter what until the very end.
It's sort of last moment of trauma that it's.
Yeah. Right. And for some reason, right, it's reliving its own death over and over again and making it readable to, and all that's doing it is an algorithm that just keeps, like, its job is to every 5 seconds refresh this image.
Yeah. Well, so anywho, I mean, we don't have answers for this yet. It's something to keep in mind. Something related to the hit, and this kind of came up in the wake of my discussion with Amy Evans, is, I was looking at these hits. Oh, and she did provide standard language. Right now we have language from IRB about this study. She was like, yeah, we have that. Here's the thing where you put, and actually, let me take just a quick glance at that. So, things like, there's boilerplate language about this research study was received by the UNCW Wilmington Institutional Review Board, and there's a number essentially associated with it. But then you also have to include minimum consent language. So they're actually kind of two different things in terms of like recruitment and consent. And she's like, in yours, you're kind of compiling what you're doing, which isn't, that's not a deal breaker, at all. A lot of studies use MTurk.
Yeah.
But it's like there's different jobs, and she said the consent language, she said you can tinker with this, and in fact you might have to, but she said the default one is your participation is voluntary. You may refuse to participate or may refuse to answer any question. You may stop at any time without penalty. And I talked to her about that because I was like, okay, when we say penalty, does that mean I have to pay them if someone takes this hit and then says I don't want to do any of the questions? Because it says you can refuse or opt out of a question without penalty.
Oh, wow.
And what she said, she's actually kind of, flexible about this. And she said, well, no, actually, one of the things that was kind of eye-opening about this was vulnerability is negotiable, right?
Yeah.
Well, I assumed, because I'm a rule follower, I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's the language and we have to abide by it. And she's like, no, what you can do is tinker with it. And then if the IRB board approves it, then it's like, well, then it was approved,
Right.
So the sort of risk is negotiable. And she's like, what you could say is something like, you can stop at any time. In order for you to receive the payment or reward, you would need to complete the entire survey.
Yeah.
So we could, essentially kind of parse up when we say penalty, what we mean is you can walk away at any time and nothing happens to you. But if you want the reward, right? That was my question to her is withholding the reward, does that constitute a penalty, right? I'm kind of legalese it. I'm like, is it a penalty not to pay them if they don't finish it? And I mean, her take on it was, no, you can parse that into, you don't get any penalty. Nothing happens to you. You're not.
We're not sending goons to your house.
Right. You're not injured in any way if you opt out. But if you want the full reward, you do have to answer the questions. And that kind of, it raised to me, I was sort of like, well, if you do the first thing here, but you don't answer these two questions, because I was talking to her about the structure of this round one. And we talked about this, it de-incentivizes people from answering it. I was like, I'm not sure what to do with this, because if I put myself in the position of the Turker, it has these two questions where it says, were the instructions clear and was the reward sufficient? there's a sense in which if I'm in this position, because I am in this kind of position a lot, where I get a lot of feedback forms where they're like, provide any comments. I'm like, I'm not going to fucking provide comments.
Yeah.
It's exhausting. I don't have the time to do it. So like this kind of thing is like, were the instructions for this survey clear? I'm just going to do whatever gets me out of this quickly. Right. So I'm like, yeah. It's fine. It's fine. So I was like, I don't know what to do with that, because that de-incentivizes it. And also, as I was looking at these, I was like, I'm not sure the binary is great, where it's like, were the instructions clear or not? And so the more I was looking at it, I was like, would a better framework for this be something like a Likert scale?
I almost yelled. I mean, yeah, I figured you're gonna go full Likert scale, and then again get mad about the fact that somebody named Likert got to claim 1.5 as their thing.
Right, the old chestnut, our indignation that whomever Likert was just like, yeah, 1 to 5, that's me. That's mine. I get that. And though, of course, that's spread out because, there's more than just the 5-point Likert scale. But yes, I mean, not only would this give us more sophisticated information, but I was also sort of like, should this question be reformed to, complete this on the Likert scale? How clear were these instructions? 1, completely unclear, 2, somewhat unclear, middle, neither clear or unclear or whatever. 4, we might need a psychometrician's feedback on this. I don't know. 4, somewhat clear. 5, completely clear. And then require, please state why you ranked it the way you did. Now, in truth, that could still invite opting out, where it's just like, I felt it, or whatever. But it's not like the choice here is between, no, they weren't clear, and let me sound off on why. And, yes, and you move on, right? It's like, the question is rate it on the scale and then please explain your rating, right?
Because otherwise with this setup, we'll just get we won't know whether we got a yes because it's clear or we got a yes because they didn't want to answer why they said no.
Sure. Yeah. So the caveat about that structure is conceivably it makes the whole thing a little bit longer. The compensation, which we can tinker with, I think the compensation is still fine, because if we're using those ethical guidelines that were 10 cents a minute, this still is something you complete pretty darn quickly. I mean, I think the compensation is still generous, even if it takes a little bit longer. But if needs be, we tinker with the reward and expected duration just to account for. But, on the flip side of that, it's like, in a sense, it's like, we're not asking anything different than the previous one, because the current formation still wants you to provide a comment. It gives you an opt out. The second formulation doesn't give you as much of an opt out. If the question is straight up, put it on the scale and then explain your rating.
Yeah.
That the default there is, okay, that's what I'll do, versus something saying, are these clear? Yes, then move on. Right.
Yeah.
So anywho, I mean, the more I was looking at this, I was like, this should be a Likert question with explanation.
And the sense I get is from Turkers is that what they really want is just, I'll do whatever you ask, but just make it as widget-like as possible.
Right, down the line. Don't waste my time with this. Don't let me try and decrypt.
Explain why. They're not going to see that as like more work. They're going to see it as like clear, explicit instructions for how to do this hit.
Yeah, and so that kind of also speaks to, if I do want to put a scale there and then like explain yourself, should I also put language in there that's like framing the expectation? Like, I don't want to, I'll take a paragraph, but that's not the expectation, right? The expectation is, maybe a sentence of, what's your reason for this? And so
helps make the task more manageable.
Yeah.
Makes it, again, more explicit what our expectations are. And also, we don't want to have to go through paragraphs.
Right.
Like, at the other end, right? What are we going to, if we if we get what we want, are we going to be drowning in it?
Yeah. Well, because that also raised the question to me that I'm still wrestling with is, if we do that, because right now the second round, the only question is from the multiple choice, pick the one that is whatever the term is, right? Accurate, relevant. I can never remember the third one. Readable. Yeah, okay. I can always remember two of the three. So that's all that question does. And I was like, well, should that one take the was this clear, or how clear was this? I'm still like, I don't think so. I don't think it should, for some of the reasons you mentioned, like, the second round is at scale. So what would you do with 1,000 sentences? I mean, would you just feed them back into a text mining operation, just get like, the major terms, or so? Is that what you do? Or so, anywho, it's not exactly sure, but yeah, that was part of it. Is Amy Evans suggested some sort of revisions here anyway. One of which was in our statement where it says, like, we have bold-faced, please be aware that the summary you submit here may be reprinted in later surveys to help determine accuracy.
Yeah.
Which is where we're telling them, hey, we're going to use that work. She said, include that, but make sure it's clear, say in this statement, you will remain anonymous, but the summary you submit will be used in future things, but there will be no identifying marks of any kind. I was like, oh yeah, that makes complete sense, right?
Yeah. No, it's interesting at this point to be sort of balancing these various things we're doing, right? That I think the sound advice we got from Kagel about the distant, right? That part of the reason we're doing that is at least to make some move towards participant as opposed to research subject. Yeah. And then IRB is like, well, they are also research subjects. So you have there's really interesting where like every time we do one thing, it creates another, again, like you say, all this is a moving target, right? Everything we do that will add in language of participation, we have to then address in terms of how exposed they are.
Yeah. Well, and in fact, that came up in our discussion. She's like, because she said, so for the second round, you don't have those summaries, right? And I was like, no, we don't have the summaries because they depend on that first one. She said, okay. She said, you can probably work this up into one approval, but she said, just be aware there's a chance you'll have to split these up. You'd have to do the first thing and get that list of summaries and then show in the second one, it's like, here's the list. And that's where it's going to be picked. She said, just be aware there's a chance that they may require like a two-step thing, basically, because you don't have the summaries yet.
Yeah. What are you going to actually have them? I mean, because ERB going, what if these summaries end up being, I don't know,
right,
or harmful or explicit in some way?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. Like, I expect the summaries just to be like summaries, but what if one is threatening? We don't know. I mean, I can't imagine it happening, but that's the thing is like probably from an IRB's perspective is it's an unknown. It's like, well, you don't know what they're going to be, which means
if we came back and said, we think they'll probably be good, but we don't know whether there might be a terrible one. And IRB is like, yeah, that's why there's IRB.
Right. Yep. So, I mean, I don't know if maybe, oh, sorry.
No, I said, yeah, we exist because you can't. Mitigate risk. And you're not knowing how this will go is a risk.
Yep. So I don't know if maybe I can approach that by maybe saying something like there would be a layer. We're not going to take them necessarily raw. If there are any in there that are, threatening, that they'll be manually groomed out, right? We'll only put the ones that are not
death threats.
I mean, I wonder if I put some language in the proposal. I mean, the proposal is itself a thing, right? Where maybe I can put language saying, that the summary submitted will check to make sure nothing in there is, aberrant. Although, I don't want to overly groom them, but I don't want anything in there that, the summary is, I'll kill you and I'll find you and I'll kill your family. Right. Which, it's like, I think it would be useful to say there'll be a manual check just to make sure, to see it as like preventing spam.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. There's a manual check where we're looking at the summaries just to make sure there's not anything in there that, it's just someone that's posted a link to a porn site saying, hot folks on camera, right? I mean, it's the same sort of checks you do for any kind of like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it.
There to clean it up and just came up with hot folks on camera.
You know what I am.
Euphemism for pornography ever. What's pornography? It's just hot folks on camera.
That I think we're onto something here. We found a niche that isn't being served.
Hot folks on camera.biz.
Quick, register that before this gets posted.
Oh no, just to watch as you got halfway into that sentence and then you saved it nicely. Very admirable.
And I'm very conscious of what I say when I'm being recorded.
I choose my words very carefully.
Crap. So anywho, that came up. That came up, right? I mean, just the notion that you may have to do a two-stepper here just because of the unknowns. So anywho, all of this is kind of in the context of, it was a good discussion. There were some tweaks and we got some language and that kind of stuff, some tweaks. And, a lot of what she's doing, it's because, she's not, the one who stamps this, right? It's not the sort of pose we're always in as teachers where it's like, I'm both your coach and your ref, it's like, I'm encouraging you what to do, but I'm also the one who's going to at the end say, you blew it.
Yep.
He's really, she's just like her, role in this is I want you to get through the board so that it's not a hassle,
Truly a facilitator.
Right. And it's better for everybody. And I was like, that's why I want to meet with you, because I don't want to turn in something that's sloppy and waste everybody's time, where it's like, well, you need to kick this back because you've missed basic things, She did also, because I was telling her, that our timeline wasn't like super pressing, but I was like, the Cahill grants, they have to be spent by a certain date. And she's like, oh, that sounds like a tight turnaround. And I was like, do you think we can get through? And she's like, I think you can get through in time and everything. And she said, I was more surprised that they just announced those grants. I was like, yeah, I think they told me in December, but you got to spend them by April. So anywho. All right, well, that's the gist. Yeah, we're at an hour. That's the gist, though. We didn't really get into the revisions for the first product.
So our discussion of the discussion section, I think, was actually helpful. So we did.
Well, and we've got that outline up there. Have you looked at what's there recently?
Yeah, and I'm diving back into Jim's ethical programs book, just for some. As I put in the outline, his arguing about, with, and in software, I think could provide a useful, why this should be of interest to rhetoric folks. So, and also one of the reviewers just wanted more recent citation work in this area. So I was kind of, killing two birds with one stone, as it were.
Yeah, and that was the part that we had discussed was consciously a little hand wavy, that we were sort of like, this needs to be shored up, and then we never really did that. And so it was rightly pointed out as being a soft spot.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where, so in the revised outline, that's kind of where I've led up to at this point, is sort of we're at the juncture now where rhetoric has something to say, because I just sort of talked about, there's a ongoing interdisciplinary dialogue about this.
Yeah.
We're at the point here where it's like, and rhetoric hasn't really participated in it, even though it is kind of in our wheelhouse because it's built on text and it taps into these larger issues of ethics and labor and other things that are, you know, relevant to us.
I think what I want to use the Brown for is that whatever the human is, it's being argued about in the Turk, you know, not just using Turk to make the argument about what a human is, that's actually unfolding in the software. So I think that's a useful move to make.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I'm going to take another crack at that textual component and write it less, I don't know, write it gooder. I mean, partially I kind of got to it saying this should probably be something that's like, you know, creative writing. And then I was like, oof.
Right. Yeah, I know what you mean.
That's not my thing. But I do think it needs to be, I mean, in many ways, it needs to be a little muddier.
Yeah.
Right. So that they've got to do the work of pulling something out from it, as opposed to it's just a list of details, and they could do the task by just picking the most prominent one. So what I need to do is just have elements or moments of a scene that they then have to cobble together.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's like there's two ways to go. Do you make it sort of like more creative writing and narrative, as though it's an excerpt pulled out of a short story?
Yeah.
Which we saw on Turk, right? I mean, you know, people making sense of Brave New World and that kind of thing. Or do you go the other direction of, is there some way I can just literally like description without synthesis? I mean, you know, is it possible? The problem is it'd be infinite. You know, a boy sits at a desk. You know, yeah, because it opens the can to, like, you know, a boy sits at a brown wooden desk. You know, I mean, it's like you could infinitely.
Yeah. So I think I may try to just write a little vignette.
Yeah.
You know, I'll try to recreate some creative writing stereotypes and
creative writing, or even, like, you know, I wonder if someone in like education, like early childhood education, because they work a lot with this, like, you know, as I'm sure your kids did and my kid is doing, they get into stuff where it's like, you know, read this really short story and then can you tell me the main point of it, you know?
Yeah, I might go grab some of Will's old textbooks and
see how like early childhood education does this.
Yeah.
Or just talk to someone. I mean, if we have education here, that's a
Yeah.
big deal.
Well, I'll just talk to Jody. That's, you know, she's
right.
That's her thing. Yeah.
There's different ways to proceed with this. Yeah, because that's something Amy Evans did point out. She was like, you know, make sure to include the media. And I said, it's on its way.
Yeah.
She's like, yeah, however, it's there, you know, just we need the files uploaded or whatever.
One point real quick I wanted to make is that we just shot it on a iPhone from distance. And so you can kind of, I clean up the audio a little bit. So you can kind of make out Will's voice for the most part. And then I thought about redoing it, but then given the ways that we're approaching readability, the idea that there might actually be some artifacts in the media that people will have to like parse, I thought potentially was actually a serendipitous thing.
Yeah. So, and I listened and watched to it. Oddly enough, or maybe not, I don't know. I thought the audio one, I was able to get the gist better than the video. I think because, I don't know, maybe I had expectations of the video of, like, you know, action.
Yeah.
Whereas the audio was just a data stream. I mean, I could suss it out, but again, I knew what it was. So I think one thing maybe is, before we like post the hits wholesale, it's just good practice to post like 5 of, you know, the same thing, but just like open it up for 5, just as a trial run.
Yeah. To
see, you know, are the instructions clear? Did we screw something up and we're getting, you know, so I mean, maybe if like we did that and it, the responses we got were like way off, you know, like a couple is at a restaurant or something like that, you know, maybe it's like, well, do we need to reshoot this, or
we can fix it in post or do reshoots, you know?
which
on union crew, so it's pretty easy to fix
yeah.
this.
I mean, so maybe a trial run might actually give that information. The caveat of that is we may at that point have to submit a revision to IRB, which I've had to do. It's not a big deal, but it's like
change the media.
Yeah, because once you're approved, if you're going to change something, they want to know. And usually it's quick. It's like, oh, we did this, and they'll be like, yeah, it's not a big deal. Like I had to do that with an interview because our questions changed. And so I was like, oh, well, we revised it. These are the new questions. Like, yeah, it's not a big deal. But we had to do it. So I mean, that may speak to maybe it's a better idea to test it with people before we submit it. Maybe before testing it on Turk and before submitting it to IRB, test this some people who don't know what the scene is.
Yeah.
Just, I don't know, just find some people, grad students, something.
Yeah.
And be like, hey, can you guys tell, just do it with them. Say, yeah, I mean, write down a 1-sentence summary of what you hear and then see what we get. I mean, it might make sense to like test this first.
Yeah. Yeah, because I know we wanted to keep them short, and I was trying to like, what's the most I can.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you want to make it 10 seconds, what you're going to lose is a lot of the contextual stuff. But again, I thought given our interest
Right.
is content part of readability. Like I can't parse this unless I know what's their motivation.
Well, that's the thing. It's like some amount of variance is the intent where, if you get, 5 summaries that are seemingly pretty close and one that says, it's a couple at Valentine's Day at dinner, and be like, well, that's okay. I mean, it's fine having one that's, or some degree of variance is what we want. The question is kind of at what point does it become incoherent, where it's like, well, it's random at this point, it's semi.
To a certain extent, that's why I was thinking about the noise, right? Yeah, we do want some outliers because it suggests that the readability isn't automatic, that there's actually some, if everybody like nails it, be like, okay, like, yeah, you're right. We do want variance because it means then that there's significance in some other place.
We do want some interpretation going on, particularly because, like, as we were talking about with Sean, it's like, imagine the task of the captioner where, it's like you do have to make judgment calls,
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think a good idea might be if we both took these. Well, I guess the text one isn't firmed up yet, but at least the audio and video, and I guess the image is the image, right? And that I thought actually was pretty darn clear because like there's a textbook clearly right in the middle. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, well there's I think we'll get a range of what people think is important there, but it's like, yeah, that's probably as good as it's as
Garth watches 2 people work on homework.
Yeah, that's funny because like for me, because I know it, I was like, yeah, that's ancillary information. For other people, particularly those who don't know who Garth Brooks is, be like, creepy man stares at camera while unaware. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you don't know who Garth Brooks is, which believe it or not is a sizable chunk of the population.
I have a hard time believing that. No. Yeah. Plus, I don't know, depending on how quickly I look at the image, does it render as a cardboard cutout?
Right. There's a sense in which it's a frame from Too Many Cooks.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's not my inspiration. But yeah, I mean, I picked that spot. Will was already annoyed because I made him move his homework, but I wanted it to be like a red desk, to have some things that were potentially, not red herrings, but enough like other distinct features that people would have to do some interpreting just to decide things that are in the image prominent, right? But maybe not vital to what's happening. So it's like, I dare you to ignore the Garth Brooks cardboard cutout when you write the description of this image.
Well, so maybe, if we can just maybe just ask students to do it or something. Just, just run through it. Say, here's a clip, write me a 1-sentence summary and see what we get there.
Yeah.
That may let us know in advance. It's like, oh, well, maybe we need to reshoot this or ADR the audio or something.
Dub it. Yeah. Yeah. Will, we gotta put a lavalier on you next time.
Bigger.
Yeah, I yelled Showtime a bunch and had him do cocaine, but his energy was still pretty low before the scene started.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I've got a student pool, but I'm sure I can find. I mean, it would take well, it would take a minute. That's what our hit says.
Yeah. Can I post? Should we use Twitter for this, or is that too?
You can do whatever you want.
Well, I will. I always do what I want. I'm my own boss.
Yeah, I don't.
Okay, well now we're just bebopping and scatting. So
Yeah, but I mean, I think the takeaway is I think it might be worthwhile to do the audio and video.
Oh, definitely.
At least, and yeah, get some feedback on it.
Yeah.
Pause. All right. So yeah, that's something. Yeah, the revisions for the first one are going on. I'm gonna start the actual IRB proposal because it's a thing that you enter into.
Yeah. I'm gonna finish. I got a few modules left in my training, so when I get my approval, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, there's some certificate you get.
Yeah. Ooh. Suitable for framing?
I don't remember if it's that or if it's just like a check mark on your login that says you've done it.
I'll print it out and tape it over my.
Yeah, we'll have to have it. And then they said they will actually contact your institution's IRB, and often they'll just allow my institution's IRB to be the central one. Basically, you'll go through them, but they say some institutions, they'll require a separate proposal at your institution. That was another thing. Where they said it may have to go through both because some institutions will say, no, you can go ahead and proctor it. Other institutions will say, no, they have to go through ours basically as well. So,
okay.
Just something to know.
All right. Well, we know what we're doing.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Later.
Yep. I'll see you.